We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We are only going to accept the best deal for Canada. That is very much informed.
At a time when pressure from Washington is rising by the hour, Canada's response has been anything but rushed. Speaking at the First Ministers' meeting in Huntsville, Prime Minister Mark Carney laid down a simple but resolute message. Canada will not sign just any deal. It will only accept the best deal. There's no panic, no scramble toward the August 1st deadline that President Trump imposed. Behind closed doors, Canadian ministers and senior advisors continue talks in Washington. But Carney made it clear, if the deal on the table doesn't meet Canada's long-term economic interests, there will be no signature. This is not hesitation, it's strategy. Because when the rules keep changing, and when the other side can shift the goalposts at any moment, signing quickly is not a win, it's a trap.
I think understand that a bad deal for Canada would be worse than some of the other options, like putting up with more uncertainty for a few more months, taking us later into this year.
Trump's tariff threats, once seen as a power move, are starting to backfire. The promise of punitive duties, 25% on steel, up to 35% on other Canadian goods, was meant to force a concession. But instead of dividing Canada, it's uniting it. Across the country, provincial premiers are standing shoulder to shoulder. From Ontario to Alberta to Manitoba, the message is consistent. Canada will not be bullied, and it won't pay any price for predictability. Even provinces hit hardest by tariffs, those relying on auto, steel, or lumber exports, have refused to fold. They're now backing efforts to support domestic industries, invest in local production, and prepare matching tariffs if needed. As Premier Doug Ford put it, weakness won't be respected. Only strength will.
Our phone is ringing off the hook from other countries who want to do more with Canada. I've had over 80 bilaterals with world leaders since I became Prime Minister.
While the U.S. threatens, the rest of the world is calling. Carney revealed that since taking office, he has held over 80 bilateral meetings with global leaders, and many of them are now actively seeking deeper trade ties with Canada. This shift isn't theoretical, it's already happening. Premiers have launched trade missions across Europe and Asia. Canada is advancing talks with Mercosur, India, and even reviving dialogue with South Korea and China. But just as importantly, Canada is building resilience from within. A wave of new interprovincial trade agreements, spearheaded by Ontario, Alberta, and Nova Scotia, has laid the groundwork for a more unified national economy. The One Canadian Economy Act, passed just weeks ago, removes federal-level barriers that once slowed internal commerce. The idea is simple. A country less dependent on any one foreign partner can negotiate with more leverage and more confidence.
This isn't just about who Canada trades with. It's about how Canada stands on its own. From steel to aluminum to rebar and I-beams, provinces like Ontario and Manitoba are investing in domestic production capacity. Factories that once relied on U.S. imports are now pivoting toward local supply chains. And on the policy front, every major project, whether it's pipelines, energy infrastructure, or manufacturing, must be built with consensus, not coercion. Manitoba, for example, has delayed signing a west-to-east pipeline agreement until it secures full support from Indigenous communities. The result may take longer, but it will last longer too. These decisions aren't made in fear of tariffs. They're made with an eye toward the future. A country where resilience, not reliance, defines its economic path.
I think we should maybe just let go of the August 1 deadline as a fixation, and the fixation that we should have is a good deal.
Right.
The long-term best interest of Canada.
In many ways, Trump's strategy has produced the opposite of what he expected. His tariffs were supposed to isolate Canada. Instead, they've triggered something few saw coming: a nationwide effort to rewire the economy, reinforce internal unity, and expand global relationships. Canada is no longer waiting for a lifeline from Washington. It's building its own bridge, one that stretches from Asia to Europe, from Ottawa to Alberta, from local factories to global forums. And whether a deal with the US comes next week, next month, or not at all, one thing is clear. Canada is negotiating not from a position of weakness, but from a place of strength it's never fully tapped into until now.
Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions.
When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift. One designed not just to react, but to rebuild.
The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chain. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments.
The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly two-thirds of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100%, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese-origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs. With one exception, U.S. steel remains untouched under existing CUSMA terms. This isn't retaliation, it's insulation.
So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
Rather than escalate tensions, Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost U.S. contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements, covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off U.S. steel for now, while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table, without appearing weak. Though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the U.S. free of tariffs under this administration, his approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate, 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals.
Say we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the US one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
Canada isn't just responding to a crisis. It's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment. But it offers breathing room and a pathway forward. Whether or not a deal is reached by August 1st, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands.
With the trade war between Canada and the United States causing economic uncertainty, Canadian leaders are looking to Asia and Europe for reliable trade partners.
European negotiators say trade between the U.S. and EU could be effectively cut off if Trump goes ahead with a 30% tariff that he threatened over the weekend.
America's global influence was built not just on military power, but on long-standing partnerships, especially in trade. Today, that foundation is starting to break. If President Trump continues to raise tariffs on key allies, the United States risks more than short-term retaliation. It could lose its central role in the global economy. Canada is shifting its trade strategy. The European Union is preparing to strike back. And together, these moves are showing that the world may be ready to move on without U.S. leadership.
The deals are made. There are no deals to make. They would like to do a different kind of a deal, and we're always open to talk. We are open to talk, including to Europe. If in fact they're coming over, they'd like to talk.
President Trump believes that high tariffs will force other countries to accept better trade terms. But if those countries decide to stop relying on the U.S. altogether, the result could be long-term damage. When global supply chains adjust, the changes are not easily reversed. Companies may move production away from North America. Trade flows may shift permanently. Key U.S. industries, like finance, pharmaceuticals, and technology, could face new restrictions and rising costs in foreign markets. And once trading partners begin to rely less on U.S. systems, including the dollar and American tech platforms, the U.S. risks being left out of decisions that shape the global economy. The European Union is treating Trump's tariffs not just as an economic threat, but as a strategic rupture. Officials in Brussels say a 30% tariff on EU goods could effectively wipe out transatlantic trade. According to the European Commission, the U.S. imports more than $600 billion annually from the EU, while exporting only $370 billion. At first, the EU held back, pausing a $25 billion countermeasure package to allow for dialogue. But they've already prepared a larger $72 billion retaliation if talks collapse. Their strategy is twofold: de-escalate if possible, but punish if necessary. What's notable isn't just the scope of the response. It's the areas being targeted, U.S. services like finance and tech, where retaliation would hurt most.
Last month, you look at the data from Statistics Canada, which looks at the month of May, and we saw the highest amount of merchandise exports to non-U.S. countries since at least 2021.
Canada's response has been quieter, but no less consequential. After Trump's tariff announcement, exports to the U.S. dropped sharply. In May 2025, Statistics Canada reported just $41 billion in exports to the U.S., a 25% decline from January. Meanwhile, exports to non-U.S. countries rose to $19 billion, the highest since 2021. Canada is redirecting gold to the UK, oil to Singapore, pharmaceuticals to Italy. More than that, Canada is reopening dialogue with India, despite political tension. For Alberta and Saskatchewan, accessing India's pulse crop market is critical. This isn't just diversification, it's a structural shift. Prime Minister Mark Carney isn't threatening countermeasures. He's methodically building an economy that no longer depends on the U.S., a move supported by both policy and public sentiment. Trump's strategy is clear. He believes pressure forces deals. But pressure without flexibility can create fractures. The EU isn't folding, Canada isn't waiting. And if Trump continues down this path, America may win a few concessions, but lose the cohesion that once made it powerful. In trying to maximize leverage, Washington could undermine its own role in global leadership. Allies won't leave in anger. They'll simply move on, with new partners, new trade routes, and a future that no longer revolves around the U.S. Trust once broken is hard to rebuild. Trump's tariff play may feel strong in the short term, but the long game is different. And as Canada restructures and Europe prepares its counterpunch, one reality grows clearer. The world won't wait for America to lead. Not if it keeps pushing them away.